The HOA scheduled an emergency meeting for the following week, supposedly to discuss urgent matters. We showed up, figuring it would be just another chance for Karen to flex her power. But as soon as we walked in, there was a different vibe. The other neighbors who'd been fed up with the board were starting to gather, a little more confident now that they had the evidence we'd uncovered. Karen, of course, walked in like she owned the place, all smug and ready to intimidate. She had no idea what was about to hit her. The tension in that room was palpable. You could feel everyone waiting for the right moment. My wife and I just sat back watching, knowing that the moment was coming soon. But just as the meeting started, Karen made an announcement that left everyone frozen in place. She was about to make a move that would change everything, and I had no idea how we were going to stop it. Just as the room fell silent and Karen was about to speak, the door to the meeting hall suddenly slammed open. Everyone turned, and in walked someone none of us expected, Detective Marlowe from the local precinct. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. His presence immediately shifted the energy in the room, and Karen's smug smile faltered for the first time. People started whispering, unsure of what was happening. Marlowe didn't waste any time. He walked right up to the front of the room, pulled out a file, and dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. "I'm here to inform you all that this HOA board is under investigation for financial fraud, embezzlement, and a series of violations that affect not just this neighborhood, but the entire county." The room was stunned. For a moment, it was like time stood still. Karen's face drained of color. What none of us knew, what none of us had anticipated, was that Karen had already been under investigation for months. Her scheme was bigger than any of us could have imagined, and the documents we'd uncovered, those were just the tip of the iceberg. The detective explained that a whistleblower had already tipped off the authorities, and they'd been quietly watching the board's every move. But here's the kicker. Detective Marlowe didn't just show up to drop that bomb. He was there because the real whistleblower was someone in this room. And Karen? She had no idea who it was. The stakes just went from a neighborhood squabble to something much more dangerous, and Karen was about to lose everything. But the real question now was, who was going to make the first move? The room was in total chaos now. People were scrambling, trying to process what Detective Marlowe had just dropped on them. Whispers filled the air, some in disbelief, others in shock as they realized their neighborhood was at the center of something much bigger than they could have imagined. Karen, though, was paralyzed, standing there in complete silence, her usual confidence shattered. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but the words just wouldn't come. Detective Marlowe kept his eyes on her, almost like he was waiting for her to crack. And then it happened. My wife, who had been quiet this whole time, slowly stood up. She didn't say anything at first, just walked over to the table, grabbed the file, and opened it. The room fell even quieter. She didn't look at Karen. She didn't need to. She just turned to Marlowe and nodded. "You're right. The paperwork's solid, but I think there's one piece you're missing." She pulled out a letter from the file, one that Karen had apparently overlooked. The letter was addressed to the HOA board, detailing a large, unreported donation made to Karen's personal charity. It was dated * 2 days ago *. That's when Karen's face changed from shock to outright panic. She knew she'd been caught, and she could feel the walls closing in on her. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. Marlowe didn't turn to the group or to the police, like I thought he would. Instead, he handed the letter to my wife and said, "You know what happens next. You're in charge now." My wife, my quiet, recovering wife, wasn't just the judge on the case. She was the one who had orchestrated the whole investigation from the inside. The manila envelope with the evidence, that had been handed over to her anonymously by someone inside the HOA months ago. She'd been setting Karen up, waiting for the right moment to strike. I stood there stunned as my wife looked up at Karen and calmly said, "You've made your last mistake, and now the law will deal with you." Karen, who had thought she was untouchable, was suddenly staring at the one person she could never outsmart. The room fell silent again, but this time there was no escape. You ever have one of those moments where someone picks the absolute worst person to mess with? That's exactly what happened last week in our neighborhood. My wife was coming back from physical therapy. She's been recovering from a car accident and needs crutches to walk. As she was heading toward our front door, one of our HOA board members, who we'll just call Karen stormed up out of nowhere, yelling about some unauthorized lawn decoration. My wife calmly tried to explain that we'd already gotten approval, but Karen wasn't having it. Things escalated quickly, and then, out of nowhere, Karen actually kicked one of my wife's crutches out from under her. Yeah, she really did that. But here's what Karen didn't know. My wife isn't just some quiet neighbor. She's a federal district judge, the judge presiding over a lawsuit that could determine the future of the HOA board itself. That same board Karen claims to run. And now, thanks to one stupid decision fueled by arrogance and entitlement, everything is about to change. This isn't just a story about neighborhood drama. It's about power, ego, and what happens when people forget that others might just have more power than they realize. And trust me, what happened next? You're not going to believe it. So here's some background that makes this whole thing even more unbelievable. We moved into this neighborhood about 6 months ago. Quiet street, decent people for the most part. But it didn't take long to figure out that the HOA board had its own little kingdom going on. And at the center of it was Karen, always walking around like she owned the place, nitpicking people's gardens, measuring fence heights, leaving nasty notes about trash bins being out a few minutes too long. Classic HOA power trip stuff. We'd stayed out of it first, just wanting to focus on my wife's recovery. But behind the scenes, there had been a growing list of complaints from neighbors. Turns out, Karen and a few other board members had been involved in some shady decisions, overcharging fines, selectively enforcing rules, and even blocking access to HOA records. That's what led to a lawsuit filed by a group of homeowners, challenging the way the HOA was being run. And guess who randomly got assigned to oversee that case? Yep, my wife. She was planning to recuse herself from it, but after what happened on our porch that day, things got complicated. Karen still doesn't know who my wife really is, and the crazy part, she's doubling down like she's untouchable, but that's about to change. After that scene on our porch, we figured maybe Karen would back off, realize she crossed a serious line. But nope. The next morning, we woke up to an HOA violation notice taped right on our front door. Apparently, the flowers my wife planted, on our own property, were non-compliant with community aesthetics. It was laughable if it wasn't so petty, but it wasn't just us. I started talking to other neighbors, and one by one, people began sharing their stories, fines for mailbox colors, warnings about kids' bikes left on porches. One family even got a threat of lying over a garden gnome. Turns out, Karen and her inner circle had created this whole atmosphere of fear. People were afraid to speak up because the moment they did, they'd find themselves buried in violations. But behind closed doors, the frustration was boiling. And then came the twist. Someone anonymously slid a manila envelope into our mailbox. Inside were printed emails, financial statements, and meeting notes. From what I could tell, they showed the HOA had been using member dues for expenses that had nothing to do with the neighborhood. Spa days, pricey dinners, even a payment to a consultant who happened to be Karen's cousin. Meanwhile, Karen still had no idea who my wife really was, and that made what happened next even more insane. The more we dug into the HOA's shady activities, the more it became clear Karen wasn't just a petty neighbor. She was the mastermind behind all this. The emails we found, they painted a picture of a small group of board members using their positions for personal gain, funneling money into their own pockets while keeping the community in the dark. It wasn't just a few questionable decisions, it was systemic corruption, and Karen had been the one calling the shots. At this point, I thought we were getting somewhere. I even made copies of everything we found, planning to hand it over to the other homeowners involved in the lawsuit. My wife and I had decided she would stay quiet for now. Let Karen keep digging her own hole without any clue she was walking right into a trap. But then something happened that I didn't see coming. Karen stood there frozen, realizing the walls had finally caved in. There was no escape. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but the truth had already been laid bare. The entire room now knew what she had been hiding. In that moment, I could see the shift. People who had been intimidated, afraid to speak up, were now finding their voices. Karen's reign of control had ended. Within days, the HOA was under full investigation. The board members who'd been complicit with Karen were removed, and a new, more transparent management was put in place. The neighborhood started to breathe a little easier, knowing the corruption that had plagued them for so long was finally being held accountable. As for Karen, she faced not just a lawsuit, but a criminal investigation for her role in the embezzlement and abuse of power. It wasn't just the fines or petty rules she'd enforced, it was the lives she'd tried to control. The community was healing, and for the first time in months, we felt like we could truly call this place home. But what stayed with me the most was how quickly things can change when someone who's underestimated finally steps up. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one with the most power.